I think we can get started now. So welcome everyone who's listening to us on Twitter today to today's live chat. And a special thank you to all three panelists for making time to talk to us on the special occasion of World Habitat Day. Every year, UN Habitat convenes Urban October, which is a sort of a month-long series of discussions with the intention to focus on solutions towards sustainable urbanization. And an important element of this is habitat. For the past few months, a group of us at CPR have been working to compile a report, which we hope to release soon. It's called the India Housing Report 2021, that portrays the state of housing in India at this time. In this report, we primarily focus on the idea of housing adequacy, which is articulated as a right and enshrined in international human rights law, and India also is a signatory to this. Not only is it a signatory, it's also been making rapid strides towards habitat improvement in the last few decade or so. Today's chat, I think we'll start with looking or thinking or reflecting a little bit more on what's happened in the last year and a half, which has been particularly challenging for all of us, as we deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. In housing, we've seen both how location and quality have mattered in terms of disease risk, but we've also wondered about how the sector will fare in terms of the economic recovery going forward. In fact, the Terwilliger Center did an excellent report on this last year. So I'm going to turn to Prasanna first. Prasanna Sriraman is a senior specialist market systems at Habitat for Humanity International, and is also behind a lot of the excellent work at the Terwilliger Center for Innovation in Shelter. So Prasanna, I believe you've just launched a report today looking at the construction sector's role in creating jobs and rebuilding market economies. And last year you did this sort of report evaluating COVID and habitat. So tell us a little bit about this work that you're doing, and what's the importance of housing to national economies at this point in time basis your research?
Great, thank you, Mukta. So hello everyone. So I'm glad to be part of this conversation today, especially on this occasion of World Habitat Day. It's a great time to reflect on housing and the unmet housing needs of more than 1.4 billion people globally living in inadequate shelter. So it's a great time to think about what are the solutions and what kind of collaborations can form in the market so that we deliver, or we enable access to adequate housing for all the people in a sustainable manner. So in the context of COVID last year, we worked on various things. We saw the huge reverse migration that happened in the context of COVID, but we all know that. So we all know that a large number of our workers are informally employed, and we all know that they live in inadequate conditions. It's not that this data is not there and we do not know, but we had a very visual representation of what unfolded, which sort of brought back housing again in the focus. It's not just the loss of livelihoods and jobs that made people to reverse migrate, but the kind of shelter they lived in a cramped spaces, in overcrowded spaces. There was this fear of contracting COVID, and there was no space to sort of distance themselves. So which was also one of the underpinning factor which led to reverse migration. So in the context of COVID, we also saw the huge economic loss across industries that unfolded because of lockdowns and loss of jobs, and the recovery is still in sort of in starting phases in some sectors and picking up in other sectors. So in that context, we were looking at how can housing be a contributor to economic recovery. We all know that the importance of sustainable development goals, and though housing is not an explicit goal, a lot of experts have put out evidence and shown that how housing sort of undercuts 16 of 17 sustainable development goals. So we can make progress in all these 16 goals by just working on improving housing to the millions of low and middle income people globally. So that's a setting in which we looked at this report. So this was launched last year exactly on World Habitat Day. It was called the Cornerstone of Recovery, where the focus was on bringing out the importance of housing as an economic multiplier. So housing need not be seen alone, but there is a huge multiplier effect in terms of housing. So the housing sector is a great source of employment and also consumption. When we think about housing, often the incremental owner-driven construction, or what we call as the beneficiary-led construction in PMAY parlance, is sort of invisible to our eyes. But if you look at the housing demand, it is clearly put out that 95% of the demand comes from weaker sections and low-income group, and most of these people are building houses in an incremental fashion. So they don't buy houses built by developers. So, and this house is constructed over a period of time. So it's not that they have sufficient money, they lack access to finance. So they build incrementally over 4-5 years. And there is consumption, there is economic activity that's happening throughout. So we call it as housing services. So this housing services as an economic activity is largely undercounted or not adequately counted when we look at the national statistics in terms of what is the contribution of housing to GDP. So that was one of the underpinning thoughts on this report. So how can we bring out through existing available statistics the contribution of housing to the larger economic development? Of course, we know that data is not consistent across countries. We did this report across 9 countries. So we have to do with proxies in some countries to sort of come up with approximations on how housing actually contributes more to economic development than what we actually see. So one of the findings is that, which I want to highlight here, is housing investments and housing services. So when I say housing services, it's the incremental construction, it's rentals, it's repairs, retrofit. All these actually account for close to, I think it's about 8 to 16% of GDP across these countries. So on an average, it comes to around 13% in these emerging market economies. So compare that with the US economy, it's about 14% of the GDP, housing investments and housing services. So that was one strong point that we want to put forward in the market, one with data and another with potential impact that can be created by investing in housing as a tool for economic recovery. Today, we also realized when we did the report that housing is a key part of the construction sector, and construction sector is one of the largest employers of labor in India. More than 50 million labor work in construction sector. So there is a huge employment potential in construction sector, but with the caveat that the jobs could be more decent and the people could be provided better social security and welfare and adequate living conditions. So it is in that context we set out to prepare the second report that we launched today. It's called Ladder Up, which focuses on the role of construction sector in contribution to economy and employment creation. So yeah.
Thanks, Prasanna. A couple of things which I'll come back to you later on, or we can have a more freewheeling discussion on, is, of course, you mentioned housing finance somewhere in there, and so we can come back on that in terms of what's the scope for housing finance to really boost this. We know there's potential. You've written about it. Many people have written about it, but there are certain barriers, and one of them is finance. So we can come back to it later. But the flip side of a construction-led recovery is the worry over its impact on carbon emissions. And this is sort of the thing that we've always tried to balance. It's a tough balance, especially for developing countries, as we know well from the fraught conversations around commitments and targets on emission reduction commitments. Now, World Habitat Day this year is themed around accelerating urban action for a carbon-free world. So I'll turn to Anna next. Anna, you worry about these things. Just to introduce you first, Anna Agarwal is a fellow at CPR's Initiative on Climate, Energy and Environment, and her research is on understanding India's energy demand transitions, particularly residential electricity demand with regards to cooling. So Anna, as I understand in your work, you focus on how residential cooling would be a substantial driver of future energy needs and carbon emissions. So how do we address this? I know your group has been worrying about this and has been consulting with a large number of experts on exactly this issue, and it's on point today as we worry. I mean, as this time's Habitat Day particularly focuses on the intersection between habitat and carbon emissions. So over to you.
It's a pleasure to be part of this conversation. So as you said, I think so residential sector mainly driven by the rising the increasing demand for space cooling is going to be a major driver of India's overall energy demand in the coming years. Main drivers are rising extreme summer temperatures and current low penetration of air conditioners, which makes it crucial for India to provide for this cooling need in order for citizens to be healthy and productive. But if this cooling demand is met with inefficient air conditioners, it's going to be a pain for India's mitigation efforts. But this impending transition also offers a unique opportunity because a lot of the investment in technologies, infrastructure, and people's behavior around cooling is yet to happen. So we can shape the long-term low consumption patterns if we work on it now. And the opportunity is not only in deploying efficient appliances. I think that's a big part. But also, as Prasanna mentioned, the large demand for new construction and housing. So it's about how we build our buildings, how we build our homes, how efficient those are, how we plan our cities, how the mobility needs there would be met. So thinking about all of that when we think about the future energy demand in our cities. And I can talk about anything in specific, but I think there are lots of ways to intervene and lock in low consumption patterns. Cooling demand in homes also is multifaceted in terms of looking at appliances to how we design, build, construct our buildings.
Can you say something about, basis your survey work in Delhi, something about, what are the trends that are like most easy to address from a policy perspective? You talked about like the type of appliances. Is there an affordability issue there? What can policy do to close that gap? Again, we come back to issues of money and finance, of course, as enablers for people to make the right choices. So, I mean, and of course the awareness issue. If there is an appliance which is 2% more expensive or 5% more expensive and people can afford it, do they know that they must make that choice? So if you can speak to those two factors of behavior as well as the incentive to make the right choice.
So in our study in Delhi, where we look at about 2,000 households and try to understand what the cooling demands are, how air conditioners are used, we do find awareness about energy efficiency a major deterrent in sort of more sustainable decision making. So we found that only about a third of the households are aware of the different energy efficiency schemes that the government has. For example, the star labeling of appliances, which is mandatory for household appliances like refrigerators and air conditioners. Very few households know what these programs mean. And we do find that it is the informed set of households that also make more efficient decisions, both in terms of purchase of more efficient appliances, and then later we find that they also use those appliances more efficiently. So I think more focus on awareness campaigns to increase the levels of awareness, and that's not just to know that people know about these programs, but really understand what they mean. So people shouldn't just know there's a sticker on their refrigerator, they should understand what that broadly refers to. And that understanding through our work we find translates into more efficient decision making. So awareness being one, there are other factors like you mentioned, higher upfront costs of more efficient appliances. Is also a reason why people go for a lower star rated appliance and air conditioner. But then again, I think more innovative financing schemes can help address that. We do find that majority of air conditioners are bought in installments, so that can be a very important and a point of intervention which could be done. Then there are also market availability. So 3-star ACs, which are the most popular ACs among households, are also what are found in market. So when we asked people why they did not go for a 4-star or a 5-star AC, lower availability of such appliances is a major was a reason that came.
Thanks, Anna. That's really interesting. It's interesting because I'm going to turn to Pankaj next with this sort of thought behind what Anna is saying is, do you make choices because of your bottom line, or do you make choices which are for the greater good? And that sort of question turned to developers has always been a difficult conversation. So we know, especially as the private sector has been roped into many of the sort of endeavors to provide housing to the low income segments, this has been a constant sort of conversation. So how real estate developers conceptualize real estate products, how they read the market leads to specific outcomes. And you've been tracking the real estate sector for a really long time now. Just to introduce Pankaj, Pankaj Kapoor is the founder and managing director of Liasis Fora's Real Estate Rating and Research Private Limited. He's known for his talent in conceptualizing mathematical models for real estate pricing, and Liasis Foras has recently come out with a property valuation tool. The company has a reputation for a really good real estate analytics, and they're partnering with the India Housing Report as well. So what do you think, Pankaj, the role of developers is? What can they do, both in this conversation on economic recovery, as well as this conversation on meeting emission targets or lowering carbon emissions? What's the scope that they have?
In fact, if you see that, like, the developers have looked into the housing because it used to give a good margins. So there were times when their return on equity used to be 50% because they spend the money and then the property prices used to increase, and then there used to be a big windfall gain for them, and that's what was bringing the developers. So there was a period when the post-liberalization, when the property prices started growing, and post that you see there were numbers of the developers were increasing and ever growing, all because many people were looking at the construction line and building material, building houses, because this was a growing industries and the margin itself were very good. A lot of corporates were also moving in. And then the rationalization phase came in post 2014, and post that you see that we have seen lesser number of people. I was sitting with one of the largest developer in India yesterday, and he says that the children of their don't want to get into this particular industry because now the margin is really reduced quite a lot. And that is what comes to when it comes to servicing to the lower end of the demand, which is like EWS and low income housing. That's basic reason is because it caters to very low end people where the income constraints are there, and second is the margins for the developers also very low. So in the large cities and all those things, you won't find too many developers. Maybe in the peripheries, the smaller developers, they participate because margin itself. And that's the basic reasons. If you see the low income housing eventually translates into a job being carried out by the government, and they come forward. And that's what happens during the PMAY schemes and all those things. They brought various under PPP schemes, not really come forward and participated. And then there are other issues, which is also issues related to the demand interactability. So what has happened in the post-liberalization, we have seen the land prices appreciating close to 10x. And that has created, urbanizations going to the peripheries, and that's where the demand in uninteractabilities began. So, the lower end and affordable housing are generally on those places where you don't have much of the demand interactability. So as long as there was an investor market, still some of these developers, they continued purchasing and accumulating the lands, and then they launched the projects and sold it to the investors. But post rationalizations, when the end user market began and the investors' activities were curbed down, I see there was lesser taker. So there is a contraction which is taking place, and this has been a story so far. Having said that, I see the pandemic is going to really change the spatial, behavior of housing and the needs of the housing. I see it is going to really reduce the pressure of migrations to the large cities, because I think the remote working and diffusions of the economy will start creating the demands within the smaller cities. So there would be diffusions of the demand which will be there. So the past problem in some way will get addressed. And then during last 5 to 6 years time, we see that most of the cities has moved towards creating circulations for that cities, that the metro networks and many infrastructure projects which were not available earlier now can be seen that they are in the under construction stages, and very soon we can probably see they may get really developed. But coming back to your questions, whether the developer will be participating in creating housing for lower stratas of the people and the low income and EWS and LIG, I think the participation will be very minimal, because these are the private party which are looking at margins, and the real estate has turned out to be very, very risky. So the land cost itself is way too high. If they have to develop housing projects and where you don't have much of the interactability of the demand, they may not really take those kind of a project. So looks very difficult for builders' participation. Other than that, the future prospects certainly looks good for India. I was just looking at Technical Advisory Committee report of the demographic shifts in India, and what it is suggesting that going forward, the way the age of the age bracket is shifting. So close to, the prevailing 41% of population, which falls within 25 to 55 age bracket, which are the consumers for the real estate. The contributions of this segment is going to be increased up to 50%. And what it suggests that we probably by 2031 will be requiring close to 44 million more houses. So my own sense is that the outlook for real estate is very, very good. The way the Prasanna said that the contributions to the real estate industries, real estate industry's contribution to the economy is very important. And my own sense is, as on date, the formal and informal sector together is contributing close to 5.5%. It is slated to increase in comparison to the developed world. This data I have not really seen. That's my own calculation is suggesting on that particular area. But having said that, this will be a driver, and I see that may not be a builder's catering, but having said that, the builder's market in India is just 40% of the housing in terms of values. So in terms of the unit is much lower, but still 60-65% are done by independent houses, development and the self construction in that manner. I think that will continue to be thriving.
Thank you, Pankaj. That actually, tying all the three responses together sort of gives, I'll come back to Prasanna with this question, especially because Habitat for Humanity does so much work in, supporting the poor to build their own homes across the world. And I know has been involved with some of the BLC projects as well. So this question of shifting to carbon neutral technology, and it's not just Anna spoke about, residential electricity consumption, but even the kind of building material choices that people have, etc. There is so much potential, and we've known this and talked about it for a very, very long time. But is that kind of transition possibility even available to people who are constructing their own homes in the low to middle income segments? Is that something that's even on the horizon, not just in India, but has this been done anywhere? Is there promise there for an energy transition? Prasanna, that's for you.
Okay, sorry, I was thinking when you were talking about energy, so I was thinking you were posing it to Anna. So I'll pick it up. I have a couple of points to pick up. So one
Sure.
from what Pankaj said and one from what Anna said. So that will come back to the question that you posed. So as he rightly said, so a significant part of home building happens at the BLC or what we call as the individual home builder segment, which predominantly happens in rural, small towns and urban areas other than metro cities, because land parcels are at a premium at metro cities. So people who have land, people who are being provided land through missions like Jaga Mission, are anyway going to build incrementally over a period of time, which is going to drive demand, which is going to drive construction activity, which is also going to create jobs. So which is what the report that we did today is also going to launch today is also going to speak about. So there are two broad sectors within construction, right? So there is the housing sector, and within the housing sector there is the developer built housing, and there is housing built by small builders and contractors and masons. So we do also see that there is huge potential for the mason, contractor, micro contractor segment to grow till we come to a position where we are like, it's projected that we'll be urbanized at 60% of population by 2050, which means that we should be thinking now about doing sustainable models which are attractive, profitable to private sector, but affordable to households who migrate from rural to urban areas in search of better jobs and in search of living in urban areas, not just from a transitional migration perspective, but complete migration. So we should be thinking about that now, given the limited land space, and we should be looking at policies and incentives that are attractive to the sector, at the same time affordable to the household who's to live in that place. So that's where again rental comes in, but I'm not getting into rental right now. So to your question on energy efficiency, so I want to sort of build upon what Anna said. So awareness definitely is an issue, not just at the appliance level, but when you go downstream at the low income household level, even when you take a particular product. So we at Termliga Center in India, so we work a lot on making products accessible, affordable for low income households. So how can we take certain products and bring it downstream so that there is scale for a manufacturer, at the same time there is benefit for a low income household. So one such project that we look at is construction chemicals. So we've been trying to sort of create examples, demonstrations on ground, working with building material manufacturers and households to demonstrate the benefits. So recently we did a pilot of a particular product called Cool Coat by a manufacturer in South. So this product basically brings down the temperature significantly for houses, and this can be applied not just on a concrete roof, but also on sheet metal and the cement sheet products, because earlier there were not products which can be applied in these materials which will last longer. So we do see that the products get worn off after a period of time. So we are testing this particular product which seems to bring down the temperature, but at the same time the manufacturer is committing a longer life duration for the product. So we are seeing encouraging results. So the pilot is still underway, but we definitely feel that there is a need to create awareness. There is a need to put evidence with the household in terms of cost benefit. So they all realize when intuitively when we say that over the long term you will save, but we have to put that in numbers. So we have done work on field. So I'll just take one quick example of why somebody needs to sort of take manufactured sand instead of river sand, because in Tamil Nadu there was sand mining blocked in 2018 and there was a huge crisis, but people were not willing to adopt M-sand. So one factor is that there are issues around quality and acceptance, but awareness was a crucial factor that we worked on, and creating a demonstration effect in terms of like you save say 1.2 lakhs for a house of 600 square feet, and you can use it productively in building this area, building a toilet or building a concrete roof, is a good way to create awareness. So we are inclined to sort of bring this awareness again on the climate aspects of housing. So we are not limiting ourselves to say that climate impact should be at the middle income level, but also taken downstream, and we need to create that awareness and create that demonstration effect for them to take it up and adopt.
Prasanna, a follow-up of that, and maybe Anna can also jump into this. That's great. I mean, if you present sort of a very simple calculation and arithmetic around some of these choices, definitely it's a very powerful tool. But what's the role of policy here? I mean, we've had bans on materials before, we've had aggressive subsidies and pushing of certain materials before. So what's the deal with that when it comes to, I mean, are state governments or the government of India actually aggressively backing these alternate materials? Because that seems to be sort of a low-hanging fruit in some ways, if for this sector, which is I mean, is that a priority? I mean, I don't know. Anna, maybe you can answer the broader question, and Prasanna, if you can answer, if you know of any place where, any instance where this kind of incentivization or subsidy-driven sort of models have been tried for materials, I mean.
At this point, I'm not aware of any activities that I have
So
come
it's more
across.
like pilot.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me
Yes.
like a lot of this is in the pilot kind of a phase rather than in a more mature situation. What about in cooling, Anna? I mean, we know that this energy rating thing is there a differential across different states and different locations, and how they're pushed in certain places more successfully than others?
So I think Prasanna and I think this is a very good point on sort of how do you effectively communicate what's in it for the consumer to go for a more expensive option, expensive in terms of upfront costs. Right? So communicating in terms of savings, what the break-even is. And so for air conditioners, there is some calculation that if you go for a 5-star AC versus a 3-star AC, you save this much more. But those calculations get complicated because it depends on exactly where you are, what the ambient temperatures are, what electricity bill, because we have this tiered pricing, right? So where in that pricing bracket you are would directly translate into how much you would save, then how much you're using the AC. But there are still some back of the envelope calculations that could be done to say that okay, you save in the next 5 years. So if you pay 10,000 more upfront, in 5 years you would break even or something like that. Don't quote me on that number. I'm just giving that as an example, right? But it's But I think the other question related to that is communicate to whom, right? So communicate to households, communicate to retailers, communicate. So I think the communication has to be done in terms of stakeholders across the board. So what we find is that retailers play a key role in helping the consumer decide what appliance they would want to buy. And it's not clear what drives retailers' incentives in helping making that decision. Yeah. So I think it's we need to have a communication strategy and then look at who are the stakeholders along the chain and do capacity building there. And taking the conversation sort of broader than just efficient appliances. So what the other practice that is linked to construction is some of these less energy intensive cooling behaviors, like using fans, opening doors and windows. This we find quite promisingly still quite prevalent even in AC owning households in Delhi. So unlike some of the developed countries where ACs are on all the time, when the weather is pleasant, people open doors and windows, use fans. But I do see in the newer construction around here that doing either of those things is becoming harder. The newer buildings, even residential, are coming up which do not have fans, and doors and the windows are sometimes locked or harder to open. So I think these are some of the very, I would say, low-hanging fruits that households understand the benefit of, and if it can be thought of while the building is constructed and a more focused effort is made to preserve some of these practices, that can go a long way in energy saving.
Thanks, Anna. I'll turn this conversation towards Pankaj, and maybe even Prasanna. He started to talk about rentals and then parked that on the side. But really, I mean, this question of the model of the real estate or the product, the housing product that you're delivering, when you have a build and operate kind of a situation, then obviously you're going to be thinking a lot more about things like energy savings, because whatever those savings are going into, I mean, are benefiting you. But when you are selling outright, then you're selling a particular lifestyle. And if the lifestyle that's aspirational is sort of borrowing from a Western context, where you're selling to NRIs, you're selling to well-traveled Indians who think that not being able to open a window and having a 24/7 air conditioning is the aspiration, then it's a very different ball game. So I'm moving the question for Pankaj slightly away from the affordable segment, but more to the higher income segment, which, as you yourself have admitted, the developer is likely to target at this point of time. Where do we stand on that? Can energy efficiency be a differentiator in a market where differentiators are needed, where margins are falling, but at a time when aspirations may not be very grounded and practical in the Indian context for the luxury segment or for the high-end segment? How do we tackle this particular problem? So here, I'm just borrowing from Anna. This is about awareness among developers. Like she's saying, we know little about what drives retailers. Do we know anything about what developers are going to go for in, or how can we reach out to developers with this particular, line of thinking?
In fact, some of these,
have there been any conversations that you've come across?
Yeah, some of these developers have adopted.
Go ahead. Yeah.
They are very few in comparison. So if you see the LEED certifications, residential building especially is really, although they contribute 80-85% of the real estates, but barely features in that. Like out of 1,400 LEED certified building, mostly are the institutions and then the commercial building. And you rightly said that the build and operate, because the institutionals and the commercial buildings work on the build and operate, and that's where the energy efficiencies and the cost saving and incremental cost saving becomes much more important. But when it comes to the real estates, what happens for builders, today's margin are highly stressed. So, and people have a perceptions that the building material which are more green, they are costly. So the incremental cost is higher for that. That's a basic reason not many builders are keen to get into. And then the way I have seen the incentives, if you see the LEED certification, most of the incentives so far for the green buildings has been given in the to the suppliers and the producers. Like, they have given additional FAR. Only recently we are seeing that refinancing options being offered for projects and the builders who develop the green buildings. So everything is for the from the supplier side. From the consumer side, there's nothing which has been done. In fact, I think if the consumer starts coming and asking and saying that I would like to really live in the green building, I think the builder will be bound to really provide for this. And that will happen only when the demand side shift will take place. Instead of giving higher FAR to the developers, if you start saying that the property tax for the consumer will get the rebate, the one who is following the green building, energy efficiencies, you can have a rebate on the stamp duty, you can rebate. I think the demand side polarization will force the supplier to change their model. So far, the kind of incentives which is offered are not motivating enough for them to really take additional cost to build the green building. Only handful of them are doing. So my own sense is, I think the focus should be more to the consumer. And the moment it becomes a consumption-driven incentives and more people or more consumer are keen to come forward and asking for it, I think this is going to really change the way.
Thanks, Pankaj. That's really great. Prasanna, do you want? I'm going to give you. We started with you, and I'll give you the last word, and unless anybody wants to say something after that. But essentially, this question of Are we, and I mean, a lot of the work you do is for the informal worker segment. That's sort of the focus of where Habitat for Humanity and a lot of the research, especially in the wake of COVID, has been. So what happens to non-ownership housing? Is there an opportunity there, both for both in terms of being able to give decent housing, like you said, housing that is more commensurate or matching with the kind of work that people have right now, as well as meet some of these. So I mean, are we looking at that kind of a shift, or are we desiring that kind of a shift, at least in centers, urban centers, which are high employment centers? Is there any scope for that kind of shift there?
I do think so. So I think probably we are late. So we've been discussing rental broadly in the country, but I think because of this reverse migration, ARHC came out. So, but I think that that's just a step in the direction, right? So there is more needs to be done on the rental. So we know that there is model tenancy, which is trying to sort of make it better compared to where we are in terms of landlord-tenant relationships. But still, even people in the middle income, high income segment who are renting or not, following any of the practices that are laid out in the model tenancy code. So when we go downstream, it's going to be even more challenging if we expect a landlord and a tenant to sign an agreement and all that. But that doesn't mean that we cannot stop thinking about rental, in the sense that if we are going to urbanize more and more, we need to prepare right now in terms of creating affordable rentals, repurposing existing vacant stock. So there are houses which are built in reasonably prime locations, which are not sold for whatever reason. So, and there is a cost to repurposing also. So there are various models that need to be explored. We do not know which one will work, which one will not, but we need to be thinking about rental right now so that we are able to accommodate people who are moving into urban centers. And they need mostly affordable rental, because we are talking about, again, people who are exiting from, say, sectors like agriculture and cottage industries, moving to urban areas for gig jobs or better jobs. So we know that informals, again, most of these workers are still going to end up in a job that is not salaried in the formal sense, but sort of gig plus, other recurring informal work. So it could be 2-3 works they'll be doing, but still they will be, left out of access to finance, formal finance. So we need to have affordable rentals, and the other ecosystem needs to work together for all this to, be able to address the needs of adequate housing. So we are also working to understand the rental space more, and we are working with Anand University doing a research right now to understand on the housing needs of migrant construction workers. So we know from some of the past research that a fair number of them rent. Some of them rent in formal houses, and some of them rent in informal settlements. And the other day we had the conversation where we have tech solutions like Bandhu trying to disrupt the space by coming up with solutions which say that formal rental can be as affordable as informal rental. So we are also excited about these kind of innovations that is pushed out in the market, and we are watching that space closely to see how we can intervene. So that's where we are right.
Thank you, Prasanna. Unless there are last comments from Anna and Pankaj, if there are, I'll wait and let you make them. Otherwise, we can wind up. Just wanted to tie together. Should I go ahead? Yeah. Okay. So I think it's sort of been very interesting to have the three of you talking to each other, because oftentimes when we work on a particular sector, we go deep into it, and this conversation has revealed that there are obvious intersections and interlinkages, and especially something like housing, the residential sectors is incredibly complex, and then in itself also tied together with other questions. So nothing that we do in terms of research or policy intervention is going to be in isolation. It's going to have a cascading effect on many other things. And so the complexity of the kind of landscape is I think very daunting for both for policymakers as well as for entrepreneurs, to get into it, because it's impossible to take all the considerations on board together and then make decisions. So I think we have our work cut out for us as CPR and as Terwilliger and other research institutions, to not only do in-depth research in whatever we are interested in, but also to build these cross-linkages linkages, so to actually motivate conversations where sectors talk across to each other rather than within each other, so that we can actually make meaningful contributions. So that's been my takeaway today, that habitat is so much more than what each of one of us individually thinks it is. And thank you very much for joining me today. And this conversation will, of course, be available on CPR's Twitter handle. And we will share it far and wide with more people, and hope to keep in touch, and hope to maybe meet next year with some positive, concrete news on all how these disruptions and pilots and experiments are working out, because climate is an urgent conversation for India, and unless the residential sector wakes up to it, I think it's not going to be able to, we're not going to be able to achieve the targets we want to. So thank you very much once again for joining me today. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.